In this video, I'm going to be making a floater frame to frame one of my recently completed oil paintings. It's a really simple project, perfect for beginner woodworkers that could save you a ton of money in framing costs, so stick around to see how it's made. The wood I'll be using to make this frame is poplar, and it's pre-milled, so it should keep it nice and easy. A float frame is just a frame that leaves a gap around the artwork, so the image appears to float in the frame as opposed to a traditional frame where the edges of the frame sit right up against the art. In the past, my floater frames have been very simple, just a clean 3/4 inch profile. There's a certain modern simplicity to this kind of look that I enjoyed for a while, but lately I've been experimenting with a more layered approach to making these that basically involves stacking pieces of wood together to create a beefier and more dynamic profile that can lean either traditional or modern depending on how you style it. For this frame, I'll be laminating 3 strips of wood together to get the overall shape. I'm going to be building this frame in 2 parts. The first part is the actual frame itself, what you'll see when it's all done. And the second part is what's called a strainer, which is the inner frame that will act as mounting support for the artwork itself to get screwed into. I started by ripping down the boards for the 3 pieces that make up the actual frame. Each of these will sit at slightly different depths to create a more dynamic profile. The middle section needs to be thinner than the outer 2 pieces, so I had to do some resawing on my table saw, essentially slicing the board in half. I routed out some chamfer details and cut a rabbet into the innermost board. This will create a groove along the inner perimeter where the strainer frame will sit. Once each board was prepped, I glued them together, creating 4 matching frame pieces. While that was drying, I moved on to making the strainer frame. I used some scrap 1/2 inch plywood I had lying around for this, and it was a really simple process. I ripped down the plywood to 2.5 inch boards, mitered the ends, and glued together a rectangle that is just the right size to fit inside the main frame. Once the pieces for the actual frame were dry, I cut them down to size, double checking my fit and using the strainer frame as my guide to ensure it all fits together in the end. After checking and rechecking my fit a couple of times, I was ready for glue up. Whenever I'm gluing end grain like this, I like to put down a sort of primer coat of glue, which in this case I did off camera, just wiping on a very thin coat of glue and letting it soak into the end grain and dry a bit before putting on the actual dose of glue and assembling. The open pores of the end grain soaks up wood glue and could weaken the joint, so by sealing off some of it beforehand, it should help to ensure a more secure joint. Once the frame was dry, I applied some glue into the routed channel I made in the inner perimeter of the frame, and this is where the strainer frame will attach into. After some light sanding and prepping, I was ready to finish the frame. I'm going to be finishing this frame with the General Finishes Black Poly. This stuff is super easy to work with. It's a tinted polyurethane, essentially a stain and sealer in one. I used it before on our kitchen cabinets, and I really like how it still allows the wood grain to shine through. It'll also give me a nice bit of shine, which is perfect for this project since it is an art frame and I do want it to stand out. With the frame complete, it was time to mount the painting. I do most of my paintings on gesso boards or plywood panels, but I usually add supports to the back of the panel to add rigidity and make framing easier. I added some double-sided tape to the back of these supports to temporarily hold the painting in place while I set up the spacing. I made some really crude spacers out of cardboard and painter's tape to make sure that the gap along the perimeter is the same. Then I screwed it in from behind, going through the strainer frame and into the painting panel support strips, being careful not to screw into the actual painting panel itself.